Rose Burkert and Roger Atkison were a young couple on a weekend getaway in Williamsburg, Iowa. Rose, 22, was training to be a nurse, and Roger, 32, a telephone installer repairman, booked into room 260 at the Amana Holiday Inn on September the 12th, 1980. Roger was a married man, but Rose was not his wife, and the pair were having an affair after meeting when Roger installed a phone for Rose at her house. The hotel was fully booked due to an undertakers convention, but the couple were lucky and managed to find a cancellation. They checked into the room at 7:40 p.m, and by the following afternoon, when housekeeping entered the room, they had both been brutally murdered. The crime scene was puzzling to police. Roger and Rose had been violently attacked, each receiving multiple blows with a hatchet. There were 2 chairs placed next to the bed where Roger and Rose's body lay. Roger's wallet had been emptied and the contents thrown on the floor, whereas Rose's had been left untouched on the bed. And the final most bizarre thing, a full tube of toothpaste had been squeezed out into the bathtub. The police did manage to find some DNA from an unidentified male on a towel that he had used to clean the blood from his hands after the attack. Police were leaning towards Roger and Rose being murdered by someone they knew, and it was a crime of passion fueled by rage that they were having an affair. There was no sign of forced entry to the hotel room, so did Roger and Rose recognise the person who came to the hotel that night? The case had gone cold and the police had no leads, so forensic investigators attempt to help police give the family some closure. The friends and family have their own ideas on who killed Roger and Rose, and it's led to tension lasting decades. Roger's widow Marcella was concerned that her father, Floyd Hatcher, had something to do with the murder, and has dwelled on the thought for a long time. When they went to see Roger's body, Marcella's father told her not to cry, which is something she thought was odd, as why would she not cry seeing the body of her husband? She thought that maybe her father didn't want to see her upset over something that he had done, but she was never sure. When asked about her marriage to Roger, she knew that Roger wasn't himself towards the end, but was unaware of Rose until the police asked if she knew who she was. Roger's brother and sister-in-law have always felt that Marcella had had the couple killed and asked her father to do it. This is all speculation, as the case has remained unsolved for more than 40 years, but could Marcella have been so enraged by the affair that she would have them killed? Rose's best friend Tammy speaks highly of Rose, and explained that Rose found out she was pregnant with her daughter whilst they were working together and sharing an apartment. The baby's father wasn't around from the beginning, so Rose knew she had to do things by herself. It was also revealed that just before Rose was murdered, she was engaged to a man named Danny, but she broke off the engagement with him, leaving him bitter. He would leave threatening notes on her car by saying she doesn't get to walk away, and him and a friend would sit in a van by her house and watch her. She even went to the sheriff's office and said if something ever happened to her, that it would be her ex-boyfriend that did it. So who was responsible for the murders? A jealous ex-boyfriend? A scorned wife and her father? Or was this a case of a random attack by a stranger? In order to identify who was the intended target of the vicious attack, investigators replicated the crime scene and looked at the evidence. Rose had 12 injuries compared to Roger's 7, so initial thoughts suggested that Rose was the intended victim. However, looking into it in more detail, it was determined that due to the attacker being stood next to Roger's side of the bed, the mechanics of dealing blows with a hatchet meant they had to stretch over to reach Rose, and therefore lost power behind each swing of the weapon, meaning Rose received more injuries to make sure that she was dead. Roger was the intended target, with Rose being an additional victim. Next, they looked at the location of the hotel room, and how easy it was to gain access. Room 260 was located at the opposite end of the building, through 2 doors that could only be accessed with a room key. There was also another door leading out to the parking lot, so could the killer have used that entrance rather than coming through the front door of the hotel? The room was at the end of a corridor next to only one other room, a prime spot for an incident to go unnoticed, and due to the conference happening at the hotel and with so many people around, did the killer go unnoticed too? From the crime scene photos, investigators looked into the specifics of the crime and noticed that Rose had been covered up with a bedsheet, indicating that the killer almost felt remorse for what he had done, and as a woman she deserved some respect and needed to be covered up. The crime scene evidence indicates that this was done after the attack, as blood spatter can be seen on the walls and ceiling of the hotel room. There was also the toothpaste in the bathtub, and police wanted to understand if it was the killer that had done this, and if they had, why. They also wanted to know if this was even a significant or important piece of evidence in Roger and Rose's murder. Along with the photos, investigators looked into the case files and come across another murder that happened 10 weeks prior to the killing of Roger and Rose. It took place at a hotel off the freeway, 130 miles away from where Roger and Rose were found. The murder weapon was a hatchet. The victim, William Kyle, laid partially off the bed covered in a blanket. A chair was placed next to the bed with the contents of his wallet thrown onto the floor, and there was also a tube of toothpaste that had been squirted onto the carpet next to his body. Police had identified a suspect and built a significant circumstantial case against him. His name was Raimundo Esparza, a drifter that was initially encountered in the area by railroad workers who contacted the police. He was escorted off the railroad and dropped off near to the hotel where William was staying. He was carrying a bag of tools, and there were several witnesses identifying Esparza at the hotel the night William was killed. There was also a nail clipping kit found at the crime scene, which William's wife identified didn't belong to him. They attempted to retrieve a DNA sample from the kit, but as DNA analysis wasn't as advanced at the time as it is today, the police were unable to retrieve a sample. They tried again in 2009, and although this time they managed to retrieve a sample, there wasn't enough to perform analysis on. Police interviewed Esparza for 12 hours, and he would show a range of emotion from being happy one minute and crying the next. Just when police thought he was ready to talk, he closed down and had no idea where he was. He never gave them any information that would support their suspicions, and according to the case files, Esparza died in 1983. The case files also contained a third case investigated by the Meridian Police Department that had similarities to the other two. Jack McDonald was murdered in 1970 while staying at a Travel Inn hotel in Meridian, Mississippi, and was found bludgeoned to death in the hotel bed. His wallet was missing, and again, toothpaste was found squirted into the toilet bowl. Now there were 3 cases that all had the same circumstances, and one so bizarre as a toothpaste tube. The police and forensic investigators were confident they were dealing with a serial killer, and that they could go back to the family and friends of Roger and Rose and give them the answers they need. There was an explanation given for why the toothpaste was seen at each of the crime scenes. According to a criminal psychologist working with the Galesburg police, this is particularly common with heroin addicts as a way of expressing sexual gratification, as their addiction prohibits them from doing so naturally and causes erectile dysfunction. Esparza was a known heroin addict, and it solidified suspicion of his involvement in these horrific murders, but the issue was obtaining a sample of his DNA as he was now deceased. The recommendation of the forensic investigators was to perform an exhumation of Esparza's body to collect a DNA sample, and as of 2020, the Galesburg Police Department were currently working towards having this granted. Roger's family and his widow Marcella are now closer to getting the answers they need around his murder. After decades of believing they knew, or thought they knew, who was responsible, this revelation gives them comfort that a family member wasn't involved after all. Rosie's best friend Tammy regularly visits her grave, and the day she heard the news that she was murdered was a blur, but she clearly remembers every detail about her funeral. Tammy told Rose, "I told her at her casket that day that I wouldn't rest as long as I was alive until I found out who did it and why, because I couldn't ever imagine anyone being mad at her, not that kind of mad." And after more than 40 years, Tammy is determined to find out who killed her best friend, and understands a lot of time has passed, but she is desperate for answers. If you like this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more interesting stories, and let me know in the comments if there are any other cases you would like to hear about. Thanks for watching and stay safe.